I never knew that a single sentence could slice through the air like a knife. That is, until my sister looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're too poor for a bridesmaid dress." My name is Kala Rowe, and I've spent 29 years learning how to swallow humiliation in front of my family. But this was something else entirely. It happened on a muggy Sunday afternoon in my mother's cramped kitchen. I can still feel the sticky linoleum under my feet, the stale scent of overripe fruit in the corner, and the way my sister's smirk dug into my ribs like a splinter. She leaned against the counter, a half-empty glass of rosé balanced perfectly between her manicured fingers. "Kala, don't look at me like that. It's just, this wedding is elegant. I don't want you embarrassing me in some cheap knockoff." She said it as if she was doing me a favor, as if she was saving me from myself. Behind her, our mother flitted between the sink and the stove, too polite to intervene, but too spineless to defend me. She shot me that tight-lipped, apologetic glance I'd grown used to, the one that always seemed to whisper, "Let it go, Kala. Don't cause a scene." But I'd caused plenty of scenes before, enough that my father used to say, "If you can't play the part of the dutiful daughter, at least keep your mouth shut." I wanted to shout, to hurl the entire fruit bowl across the kitchen, to scream that I'd spent every spare penny from my second job just to be here, to support her. My older sister, Cassidy, the golden child with the golden fiancé and the golden life she'd been spoon-fed since she was born. Instead, I stood there, tasting metal under my tongue, my fists balled up so tight I felt my nails break skin. "Don't worry about it, Cass," I heard myself say, my voice alien and calm. "I wouldn't want to ruin your big day." She pouted like she cared, but her eyes sparkled with triumph. "You know I love you, right? But you get how it is. Money just changes things." I laughed. It escaped before I could stop it. A jagged bark that made my mother flinch. Cassidy's expression hardened. "Grow up, Kala," she snapped. "It's not my fault you never figured your life out." I wanted to tell her that I had figured it out. That working 2 jobs and living in a studio apartment above a nail salon didn't make me a failure. That I'd learned more about grit and survival than she'd ever know swanning around boutique stores with Daddy's platinum card. But there was no point. She'd made up her mind the moment she ordered custom invitations on cardstock thicker than my paychecks. So I nodded, bit my lip until I tasted blood. And when I left my mother's house that evening, I vowed that I'd never stand small in that kitchen again. The next week, I worked every shift they'd give me. I poured coffee at dawn, wiped down greasy countertops at midnight, and in every free moment, I hunted. Not for a dress, for something bigger. See, there's a certain alchemy that happens when you hit rock bottom. You start seeing cracks in the world where light slips through. And in those cracks, you find opportunities you'd never dare dream about when you're comfortable. I found mine on a Tuesday night after my second shift. I was bone-tired, scrolling listings on my cracked phone screen, and there it was, a liquidation auction for the estate of a woman who'd once owned more gowns than I had socks. One gown caught my eye, silk, floor-length, champagne-colored, handmade by a designer whose name made my sister's eyes water when she saw it in magazines. The opening bid was so low I thought it was a typo. It wasn't. The catch? I had to pay cash, and I had exactly 6 days to pull it off. So I did what I'd never done before. I asked for help. Not from my family, never from them, but from my friend Miri, who worked in the same greasy diner with me. Miri, who always tipped her busboys out of her own pocket and who once gave me her last $50 to cover my rent. When she saw the listing, her eyes went wide. "Kala, this is revenge-level couture." "It's not revenge," I lied. "It's just something I want to do for me." She snorted, passed me her tips for the night and said, "I'll drive you there." So we worked, and we schemed, and we pulled together every spare dime. Each night my rage simmered like a pot I couldn't take off the burner. Every insult Cassidy had ever flung at me replayed in my head like a broken record. The night of the auction, my palms were slick with sweat. I wore my only nice shoes, the ones with the sole peeling off, and tried to stand tall among people who looked at me like I was an intruder. When the gown finally came up, the room buzzed, but few people raised their paddles. It was out of style, they said. Too classic. not trendy enough, but to me, it was perfect. When the hammer fell, it landed at a price that would have made my sister's mascara run if she ever found out. The final tally was just under what I'd scraped together. Miri squeezed my hand so tight I thought she'd break it. Driving home, I cradled that gown in my lap like it was a secret weapon, a promise to myself that I would never again stand in my sister's shadow. That when I walked into that wedding, I'd do it not as the poor girl in the corner, but as the storm she never saw coming. And the best part? I still had no idea how much more I was capable of. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Miri dropped me off just after midnight, the gown draped over my arm like a royal banner. My fingers were cramped from clutching the garment bag so hard, my head buzzing with the rush of what I'd done. I didn't even feel the July heat until I reached the stairs to my apartment. Rickety, warped wood that creaked under my shoes like they were warning me that I was about to change everything. Inside, I laid the gown out on my single bed. It looked so out of place against the faded quilt and the mismatched pillows. The silk shimmered under the harsh overhead bulb, each delicate stitch a reminder that for once, I hadn't let them shove me into the dirt. But as I stared at it, the high of winning began to slip away. What now? I couldn't exactly show up to Cassidy's fancy bridal luncheon and twirl around like a debutante. I needed shoes, hair, makeup, an invitation to the rehearsal dinner I hadn't even known I was disinvited from. It wasn't about the dress anymore. It was about showing them I wouldn't bow my head again. I didn't sleep. I lay there, eyes pinned to the ceiling, heart drumming in my chest. Every creak in the hallway sounded like a knock on my door. Maybe they'd find out. Maybe Cassidy would get wind of what I was planning and block me from the venue altogether. Or worse, she'd find a way to spin it back on me, make me look desperate, pitiful. A single roach scuttled across the wall above the headboard. I threw my pillow at it, missed, and let out a laugh that cracked something open in my ribs. I was done being pitiful. By morning, the city's noise filtered through my window, pulling me back into the world. The diner downstairs was already humming with the clatter of plates and the hiss of the grill. I showered and dressed in my uniform, the scent of stale bacon clinging to my hair before I'd even stepped outside. "Hey, Miss Fancy Dress," Miri called when I walked in. She was balancing 3 plates on one arm, her curls pinned up under a bandana. I raised an eyebrow. "You told everyone?" She shrugged. "You think they'd keep quiet when their tips helped pay for it?" Half the cooks and busboys whooped from behind the counter. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A real laugh that felt like exhaling after years underwater. Louise, the oldest line cook, winked at me. "Gonna show that fancy sister yours what real class looks like, eh?" "Something like that," I said, grabbing my notepad. The morning rush didn't care about couture gowns or family wars. It wanted eggs over easy, pancakes no butter, bacon extra crispy. But every order I took, every plate I carried, I felt it. The weight of the gown waiting upstairs, the tiny seed of rebellion growing in my chest. That night, I sat with Miri in her cramped living room. We spread out cheap bridal magazines and Pinterest boards on her battered coffee table. She scribbled a checklist on the back of an old receipt. "Okay, shoes we can thrift, hair we can do ourselves, makeup. I'm not good at it," I said. "Cassidy always did mine. She'd sit me down and do it for me, like she was doing me this huge favor." Miri snorted. "Nope, we're not giving her that power, you'll learn." So we practiced. At midnight, we were still smudging eyeliner and brushing powder that didn't match my skin tone. Miri's cat batted at a tube of lipstick, knocking it under the couch. When I looked in her cracked bathroom mirror, I didn't see the scrawny girl with the thrift store wardrobe. I saw someone dangerous. Someone willing to gamble everything to stand tall, just once. The rehearsal dinner was on Friday. Cassidy hadn't invited me, but my mother had let it slip where it would be. An upscale restaurant downtown, the kind that turned away walk-ins if they didn't look the part. Thursday night, I laid out the gown again. The silk caught the streetlight that leaked through my window. I imagined Cassidy's face when she saw me glide in, uninvited but undeniable. Friday afternoon, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, trimming a stray thread from the hem. My hands trembled. I hadn't eaten all day. My stomach was a pit of acid and fear. What if she threw me out? What if she laughed? What if I ruined everything? I thought of my mother's kitchen, of that sticky linoleum under my shoes, of my father's voice telling me to keep my mouth shut. I zipped up the gown and felt it hug my shoulders like armor. It was time. The cab ride downtown felt longer than every mile I'd scraped through in my life. The driver kept glancing in the rearview mirror, eyes snagging on the shimmer of silk, the twist of my pinned-up hair. "You going to the wedding thing?" he asked. "Something like that." He whistled low. "You look like you own the place." I smiled. That's the plan. When he dropped me off, the restaurant's valet glanced at me, confused for a second, then straightened his jacket. I could see the golden light inside, the silhouettes of Cassidy's perfect friends sipping wine, the swirl of her laughter. I stepped up to the door, heart hammering so hard I thought it might split my ribs. I could turn around. I could take the cab back to my studio, hang the dress back in the closet, and pretend none of this ever happened. Or I could take one step forward. I did. Inside, the maitre d' gave me the kind of look you give a hurricane you can't stop. "Name, miss?" "Calla Rowe, I'm with the bridal party." He checked the list, frowned. "I don't see." I leaned in, letting the silk sleeve fall just enough to reveal the curve of my collarbone, the confidence I didn't feel. "They're expecting me." Behind him, I saw Cassidy. Her eyes met mine across the room. For a moment, the whole restaurant seemed to hush. She rose from her seat, champagne glass in hand, her smile freezing at the edges. I stepped forward. The maitre d' moved aside, and I watched Cassidy's grip tighten around the stem of her glass. When I reached her table, I let my eyes travel over her designer gown, her flawless hair, her carefully curated friends. "Hello, sister," I said, voice calm as the sea before a storm. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. I leaned in, the silk of my gown whispering secrets around us. "Proving you wrong." Her champagne glass slipped in her fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The stem of the glass lay in Cassidy's palm like a broken promise. The puddle of champagne seeped across the polished marble, catching the light in nervous little reflections. Around us, the hum of conversation rose and fell like an uncertain tide. Some eyes flicked away, embarrassed for her. Others stayed locked on me, the intruder in the silk gown worth more than the rent on this entire restaurant for a night. I stood there, letting the silence stretch until it was tight enough to snap. Cassidy's fiancé, Brent, Mr. Golden Boy, reached over, placing a hand on her wrist. "Cass, it's just a glass." She yanked her arm back so fast that the shards tinkled like tiny bells. "Calla," she said, her voice the sweet, sharp edge of a blade. "You can't just show up here. This is private." I smiled. I could feel the stares boring into the side of my face, but I kept my eyes on hers. "And you can't just tell someone they're too poor to stand beside their own sister." I heard a soft gasp behind me, maybe from one of her bridesmaids, the ones who never spoke to me unless they needed a +1 for pity's sake. Cassidy's smile flickered. "You don't belong here." I let my eyes wander around the table. The white lilies in their crystal vase, the plated hors d'oeuvre no one touched, the bottles of wine lined up like trophies. Then I leaned in, just enough that she alone could hear me. "Funny," I said, "because it looks like I fit in better than you ever thought I would." Brent cleared his throat. "Hey, let's not do this here." I straightened, my shoulders squared under the silk. "Don't worry, Brent. I'm not here to ruin your rehearsal dinner. I just wanted to see for myself." Cassidy's lips parted. "See what?" I tilted my head. How cheap power looks when it's scared. She flinched. Just a flicker, but enough. Enough to feel the years of buried hurt crack open like a fault line. I turned away before she could see the tremor in my hands. I walked through that room like the floor belonged to me, because for that moment, It did. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool against the flush in my cheeks. The valet scrambled to find my cab. I could hear the thud of my heart in my ears, the distant clink of plates and laughter behind the restaurant's glass doors. I didn't get far before a hand caught my elbow. "Kala, wait." I spun around to find Brent, tie loosened, hair mussed. Up close, he didn't look quite so golden, more like a man fraying at the edges, stitched together by polite smiles and family money. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He glanced back at the restaurant, then at me. "Cass didn't mean—" I laughed, bitter and short. "She meant every word, Brent. Don't pretend she didn't." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, eyes darting to the silk gown, then to the sidewalk under our feet. "You look incredible." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't you dare try to soften this with a compliment." He raised both hands, palms out. "I'm not trying to soften anything. You made your point, you embarrassed her." I stepped closer. "I didn't embarrass her, Brent. She did that to herself." He winced. "She's under a lot of pressure. Her mother—" I cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Her mother? You mean our mother? Or did Cassidy cut me out of that role too?" He said nothing. And that silence was the loudest thing I'd heard all night. The cab pulled up, headlights glaring in the darkness. I stepped back, my heels clicking on the concrete like punctuation marks. "Tell her congratulations. And tell her next time she wants to keep me out, she should try harder." I left him standing there, the golden boy turned ghost under the streetlight. Back in my apartment, I peeled the gown off with trembling fingers. I hung it carefully on the back of my closet door, the silk pooling at the bottom like spilled champagne. My reflection caught in the mirror, hair undone, eyes raw, shoulders still squared. For the first time in years, I didn't look like someone who needed to ask permission to breathe. Sleep didn't come easy. My phone buzzed on the nightstand every few minutes. Cassidy, our mother, a barrage of missed calls that I let pile up like dead leaves. At 3 a.m, I silenced it for good and lay there listening to the city breathe under my window. They'd seen me now. The cracks in their perfect image had widened, just enough to let a little light through, but I knew Cassidy. She'd never let me have the last word. So I waited. The next day, I was back at the diner before dawn. Miri took one look at my face and poured me coffee so strong it made my hands shake. "Well?" she asked. I told her everything. The glass, the hush, the way Brent looked at me like I was some storm about to ruin his perfect house. Miri cackled. "Damn, girl. Did you film it?" I grinned around my mug. "I didn't need to. It's burned into Cassidy's brain forever." The bell above the door jingled. I turned to see a delivery guy drop off a bouquet so big it blocked half his torso. Roses, lilies, something delicate and white tucked between the blooms. Miri whistled. "That? From Prince Charming?" I plucked the card from the bouquet. It wasn't Brent's handwriting. "You made your point. Don't come to the wedding." No signature. But I didn't need one. I could feel Cassidy's cold fingers behind every word. Miri read it over my shoulder, snorting. "She's scared." "She's pissed," I corrected. "There's a difference." "So what are you gonna do?" I stared at the card, then at the flowers. Expensive. Gaudy. The kind of apology that wasn't an apology at all. I picked up the bouquet, stalked outside, and dumped the entire thing in the dumpster behind the diner. When I came back in, Miri had her arms crossed, one eyebrow cocked. "So, round 2? I smiled. "Round 2. The rest of the week blurred into late nights and longer shifts. Every dollar I made went into a jar under my sink. Tips. Overtime. A 20 I found on the sidewalk and took as a sign from the universe. I wasn't just going to show up at the wedding, I was going to make sure the entire town knew exactly what Too Poor looked like when it decided it was done playing nice. I called in every favor I'd ever earned. Miri's cousin, who did hair for drag queens that put Hollywood stylists to shame. A thrift store owner who owed me for covering his window break last winter. Even Luis, the line cook, who loaned me his wife's diamond studs for the night. Every night, I hung the gown up like a flag above my bed, Every morning I woke up more sure that Cassidy would never see me coming. On the morning of the wedding, the city hummed under a sky so blue it looked painted. I slipped into the gown with Miri's help, my heart drumming a steady war beat. "You ready?" she asked, pinning the last strand of hair into place. I caught my reflection. Silk, diamonds, eyes sharp as cut glass. "I've never been more ready." We stepped outside into the sunlight, my gown catching every beam, throwing it back like a dare to the world. When we pulled up to the chapel, people turned. Some whispered, some just stared. But I didn't care. Cassidy could spin all the lies she wanted. Today, the truth would wear silk and stand tall. I pushed open the chapel door, my heels echoing down the aisle, the hush wrapping around me like a crown. Cassidy turned, veil lifted, mouth open in horror. And I smiled. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The hush inside that chapel was so complete, I could hear the faint rattle of the stained glass windows when a breeze pushed through the heavy doors behind me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was like time itself held its breath, waiting to see if I would bolt or bow. But I did neither. I stepped forward. Each step down that aisle felt like a stone dropped into deep water, sending ripples through every life that had once tried to keep me small. I could see the gasps on faces I half remembered from childhood. Old family friends, distant aunts with eyes like beady birds, neighbors who used to pinch my cheeks and ask if I'd ever amount to much. Now they just stared. Cassidy's veil trembled in her fingers. Brent, beside her, glanced between us with an expression that said he'd rather crawl under the altar than pick a side. I reached the front pews and stopped. The officiant, a man with hair so white it glowed under the chapel lights, cleared his throat. "Miss, may I help you?" Cassidy found her voice before I could open mine. "You need to leave, Culla." Her tone was sugar-laced with arsenic, just loud enough for the entire room to hear. "This is not your place." I tilted my head, taking in the perfectly curated flowers, the gold-trimmed programs clasped in guests' nervous hands, the photographer frozen mid-frame like he didn't know where to point his lens. "Funny," I said, voice steady, "because I was invited once, remember? Before I was too poor for your big day." A hush, sharper this time. Some people shifted in their seats. My mother, seated beside my aunt, refused to look at me. She kept her eyes pinned to her lap, fingers twisted around a pearl bracelet I'd never seen before. Cassidy's jaw twitched. "You were given a chance to be part of this family moment. You threw it away the second you decided to make a scene at my dinner." I laughed, low and quiet. "You made a scene when you decided my worth was measured in dollars and fabric." Brent tried to interject, his voice a shaky anchor in the rising storm. "Cass, maybe we should." She turned on him, eyes flashing. "Don't you dare, Brent. Not now." He snapped his mouth shut, but his gaze flicked to me. And what I saw there wasn't hate. It was the same thing I'd seen outside the restaurant, doubt. Cracks in the golden foundation Cassidy had built so carefully around him. I stepped closer, the silk of my gown whispering secrets over the polished floor. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, Cassidy. You did that when you told me I was too poor to stand beside you." Someone coughed in the back row. A camera shutter clicked, like a gun cocking in the silence. Cassidy leaned forward, her smile ablaze. "Leave, now, or I'll have you thrown out." I shrugged. "Try it." For a second, just a heartbeat, she faltered. I saw it. The flicker of uncertainty. The same doubt that had chased her when she watched me walk into that rehearsal dinner in silk worth more than her mortgage. Then she straightened, the perfect bride again, veil pinned like a crown of thorns. "You don't belong here." I wanted to scream. To shout that she didn't get to choose where I belonged, but instead I did what I'd promised myself I would. I turned, facing every witness in that room, every judge and whisperer who'd fed her the lie that her worth was greater than mine. "For years," I said, my voice loud enough to echo through the beams overhead, "I let you all decide who I was. Poor Culla, the disappointing sister, the charity case, the girl who'd never fit into your pretty little family photos." A few people looked down at their laps, others didn't blink. "But today," I continued, my pulse roaring in my ears, "I'm done. I won't stand at the edge of this aisle like an apology you never deserved. I won't wear your pity like a chain. I locked eyes with Cassidy. You told me I couldn't afford to be part of your day, but here I am, in a gown that cost more than every lie you've ever told about me. Gasps again, real ones this time, sharp and incredulous. Brent's lips parted, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. Cassidy's face went red. "Security?" she snapped over her shoulder. "Get her out of here!" A man in a cheap suit by the door started forward, uncertain, but the hush around him held him back like a rope. I lifted my chin, the silk pooling around my ankles like an ocean. "Touch me," I said, "and I swear every paper in this town will run the headline tomorrow, 'Bride throws out her own sister for being poor.'" The guards stopped. Behind him, a few guests had their phones out, thumbs hovering. A ripple of fear twisted through Cassidy's eyes. "You're bluffing," she hissed. I smiled. "Try me." A voice cracked the silence. Not Brent's, but a soft, quivering one that startled me. "Kala, please." I turned. My mother had finally lifted her head. Her eyes, watery and rimmed red, found mine. "Don't do this here. Don't ruin this." I wanted to laugh, to ask her where she'd been when Cassidy decided I was less than family, but the words tangled behind my teeth. I took a breath, let it out slow. "I'm not here to ruin anything. I'm here to remind you that I exist, and that you don't get to silence me anymore." I glanced at Brent. "Good luck." Then I turned, the silk sweeping behind me, every eye in the chapel pinned to the back of my head. As I reached the door, the organist fumbled for a note that didn't come. The air crackled like a storm waiting to break. And just before I stepped into the sunlight, I looked over my shoulder. Cassidy's face was pale. Brent's hand hovered near hers but didn't touch it. My mother was frozen mid-sob. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was freedom. I pushed open the doors and let the warm day swallow me whole. The battle, I knew, was far from over. But for once, it would be fought on my terms. And if Cassidy thought I was done, she was about to learn exactly how poor girls survive. I walked down the chapel steps, head high, silk trailing behind me like a banner. The next chapter was waiting, and I was ready to write it in fire. Pass a fill. The air outside the chapel tasted sharper than I expected, like sunlight and freedom, but also the raw edge of something unfinished. My heels clicked down the steps, each step a drumbeat that reminded me I'd just torn open a wound that had been festering for decades. Cars idled by the curb, waiting for the wedding to be over. Some guests were peeking through the tall chapel windows, heads bobbing like gossiping pigeons. I didn't care. For once, I wanted them to see me, really see me. Without the label my sister glued to my forehead the moment she realized she was the favorite. Mary was waiting across the street. She leaned against her beat-up sedan, arms crossed, sunglasses sliding down her nose. When she spotted me, a grin cracked across her face. "Well, did you burn it all down?" I smoothed my gown, fighting the tremor in my hands. "I didn't need to. They'll do that themselves." She barked a laugh, shoved off the car, and opened the passenger door. "Come on, before they send a lynch mob." I slipped inside, careful not to crush the silk. The moment the door slammed shut, I felt my shoulders drop. The weight lifted. Not all of it, but enough to let me breathe. Miri threw the car into gear and pulled away from the curb. "So what now? You gonna hide out?" I stared out the window. Sunlight streaked through the glass, catching the spark of the diamond studs in my ears, the ones Luis's wife had lent me for this one act of rebellion. "I'm not hiding," I said. "Not anymore." "Good." Miri drummed her fingers on the wheel. "So what's next for Kala Ro, slayer of sisters and wrecker of weddings?" The question danced around my mind like a live wire. I didn't have an answer yet. Not a real one. But beneath my ribs, something new pulsed. Not anger, not quite revenge either. More like hunger. The kind that comes when you've tasted power for the first time and realized how sweet it can be. "I want to build something," I said finally. "Something they can't take away." Miri nodded, like she'd expected that all along. "You know, whatever you decide, I'm in." That night, my phone stayed dark. No calls from my mother. No snide texts from Cassidy. It was like I'd become a ghost they didn't know how to haunt. I washed the city dust off my face, peeled out of the gown and draped it over the back of my rickety chair. It looked regal and wildly out of place under the flickering light of my studio apartment. As I lay in bed, my mind replayed every word I'd thrown at my sister like stones. Each one still felt good, necessary, but a question scratched at the edge of my thoughts. What if this was just the start? I drifted off to sleep with the taste of possibility on my tongue. I didn't have to wait long for Cassidy to strike back. 3 days later, I found out exactly how small and mean her world could be. I'd picked up an extra shift at the diner, hoping to stockpile some cash to get ahead on rent. Halfway through my tables, my manager, Rudy, called me into the back. He didn't meet my eyes. "You got family problems, Kala?" I stiffened. "Why?" He pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found something that made his lips purse. He turned the screen to me. A grainy photo, me in my silk gown, standing in the chapel aisle, one arm raised like I was about to make a royal decree. Below it, a caption, "Disruptive family drama at local wedding. Sources say sister has a history of mental health struggles." My chest tightened. "Where did you get this?" Rudy shrugged, uncomfortable. "It's all over the neighborhood Facebook pages. Your sister's mother-in-law posted it first. Says you caused a scene, said we should know who we're hiring." A flush of rage climbed my neck, hot and suffocating. "So what, you're firing me?" Rudy held up a hand. Hey, I'm not. But you need to get ahead of this, Kala. People are talking." I swallowed the knot in my throat. "Yeah, I know how they talk." I walked back out to the floor, my arms leaden, every step a new bruise on my pride. Miri caught my eye from the counter, but I shook my head. "Not here. Not yet." When my shift ended, I sat on the curb behind the diner, knees tucked to my chest, phone buzzing in my pocket like a wasp I couldn't crush. Cassidy had always known how to strike, not with fists, but with rumors, lies. Poison dripped from a golden tongue. She wanted me to break, to disappear back into the shadows she'd shoved me into as kids. I flicked through the comments on the post. Some were the usual vultures picking at my bones. But some didn't buy it. Old neighbors, an old teacher, even a few people I barely knew, chiming in to say I was always the one helping others, working late, covering shifts. A tiny spark of warmth flickered in my chest. That spark grew when Miri sat down beside me, 2 coffees in hand. "Don't let her win," she said. "No preamble, no sugarcoat." "She's turning them all against me," I whispered. "She'll ruin my chances at anything." "Then build something she can't touch," Miri shot back. "You said you wanted that, so do it." I looked at her, at the reflection of the diner's neon sign dancing in her tired eyes. "How?" She shrugged. "Start small. You already got a story. Use it." The idea hovered, fragile but real. My story, my truth, not the version Cassidy peddled to anyone who'd listen. "What? Like post my own side?" I asked. "Post it, sell it, scream it if you have to." She nudged my shoulder. "The world loves a woman in a gown worth more than her sister's house, especially when she's got something real to say." I laughed, the sound ragged but honest. "Think anyone would listen?" Miri smirked. "People love a phoenix, Kala, but they'll pay to watch you burn too. Make 'em pay for the ashes." I sipped the bitter coffee, my thoughts churning faster than they had in weeks. Maybe I couldn't silence Cassidy's lies, but I could drown them out. Maybe it was time to stop surviving in the shadows and step fully into the light, silk, scars and all. The plan was a whisper at first, then a sentence, then a promise. And this time I swore she wouldn't see me coming. Miri's words lit a fuse inside me that refused to burn out. By the time the diner's neon sign flickered off behind us, my mind was already spinning with possibilities. I couldn't stop Cassidy from poisoning the small minds in our town, but maybe I could show them something too bright to ignore. That night I dragged the gown out from where I draped it over my chair. I laid it on my bed and stared at the silk that had turned into my armor. I thought of how my sister's sneer had cracked when I walked down the aisle, how Brent's eyes had followed me like he'd glimpsed a truth he wasn't ready for. I didn't sleep. I sat cross-legged on the floor, My laptop balanced on my knees, typing and deleting, my story, my words. Not an apology, never that, but a reckoning, the truth, sharp as a diamond. By dawn, my fingers ached and my eyes burned, but I had something, a post, not just on my feed, but everywhere that would let me speak. Local forums, neighborhood groups, even a throwaway blog I'd abandoned years ago when I was too tired to dream. I didn't hold back. I wrote about growing up in Cassidy's shadow, about working 2 jobs while she called me lazy, about being told I didn't belong in the family pictures because my clothes embarrassed her. I wrote about the rehearsal dinner, about the chapel, about the silk gown worth more than her lies. And then I signed it with my full name, Kala Rowe. Not the poor sister, not the pity invite, just me. I hit Chash Post and shut the laptop before I could second guess it. I felt sick, free, terrified, powerful, all at once. The next morning, the diner was buzzing. Not the usual hum of gossip about whose kid failed algebra or which neighbor's dog dug up whose roses. This was different. Every conversation paused when I walked in. Some people smiled. A few just nodded, eyes flicking away like they'd read something they weren't sure they had permission to believe. Miri met me at the back, a grin wide enough to split her face. "Girl, you broke my phone." "What?" She flipped her cracked screen around. "Your post. It's everywhere. My cousin in Portland messaged me at 3 a.m. asking if you're that Kala Rowe." Heat bloomed in my chest. Good or bad? "Both," she said, honest as always. "Some people love it. Some think you're airing dirty laundry. But they're all talking." Luis stuck his head out from the kitchen window, spatula in hand. "Hey, Kala, you signing autographs yet?" I rolled my eyes, but the laugh that bubbled up was real. "Shut up, Luis." "You're famous now," he teased. "Next round's on you." Miri squeezed my shoulder. "They see you now. You took back the narrative." It wasn't all pretty. By my lunch break, I had 3 nasty messages from fake accounts, probably Cassidy's friends, desperate to claw the spotlight back. But I also had twice as many from people I barely knew, telling me they'd felt the same. Pushed out, looked down on, called worthless by their own family. One message stuck with me, from a woman I hadn't seen since high school. "I always wondered where you went, Kala. Glad you found your voice." It was like pouring water on a spark until it turned into steam, then fire. My story wasn't just a spectacle, it was a door. And people wanted to walk through it with me. By the end of the week, I'd been asked to do a local podcast. A friend of Miri's, a girl named Jules, who ran a series about hometown scandals. Normally, I would have said no. I'd always hated the sound of my own voice when it wasn't serving coffee or taking orders. But when she called, her energy crackled through the phone. "This isn't just gossip, Kala, it's survival. People need to hear it from you." I looked at the gown draped over my closet door. "Fine," I said. "But I'm wearing the dress." Jules cackled. "Yes, Queen, let 'em know." Miri came with me for moral support. The studio was tiny, the walls lined with soundproof foam and posters of past guests. I sat on a squeaky stool, the mic inches from my mouth. My palms sweated through the silk, but I didn't flinch. Jules leaned in, voice soft. "Start from the beginning, your words, no one else's." So I did. I told them about the sticky linoleum in my mother's kitchen, about the glass of rosé and Cassidy's smirk, about the auction, the silk, the rehearsal dinner, the chapel. Every twist of the knife, every time I swallowed my pride because it was easier than screaming. And I told them why I stopped. When we wrapped, Jules turned off the mic and just stared at me. "You know you just blew this wide open, right?" I shrugged, my heartbeat still thrumming. "About time, don't you think?" Outside the studio, Miri pulled me into a hug so tight I squeaked. "Kala, you're unstoppable!" "I'm not unstoppable," I said, half laughing. "I'm just done pretending I can't be." Cassidy's response came 2 days later, predictable as clockwork. A glossy, posed photo of her and Brent on their honeymoon. Champagne glasses, tropical sunset, captions dripping with sugary righteousness. Asterisk, focus on love, not hate. Asterisk, she wrote, like she was the wronged party, like her big sister had ambushed her perfect life just to be cruel. I almost laughed when I saw it. Cassidy's real panic wasn't me showing up at her wedding. It was me refusing to disappear after. But what she didn't know was that the wedding was never the point. The point was this: my life, my voice, my story. And every girl who'd been told she was too poor, too small, too loud, too messy. They were watching. One night, Miri and I sat on my fire escape, cheap wine and paper cups, my silk gown draped over the railing like a battle flag. "You know," she said, swirling her drink, "you could do something with this. For real. A blog, a podcast, a site for people like you. Turn this into a living." I snorted. "What, make a career out of being the family disgrace?" "Not a disgrace," she shot back. "A survivor. A storyteller. There's power in being the black sheep. Everyone wants to know what you're gonna do next." I looked at her, the city lights painting her face gold and blue. "You really think people care that much?" Miri lifted her cup in a mock toast. "They do now, and tomorrow they'll care even more." I leaned back against the rusted metal railing, the night breeze carrying the scent of jasmine and exhaust. Maybe she was right. Maybe the silk gown wasn't just a symbol of defiance. Maybe it was my invitation to something bigger. A door no one could shut in my face ever again. I closed my eyes, listening to the city breathe around me. I didn't know exactly what came next, but I knew this much. Cassidy had tried to bury me. She forgot that I was a seed. And now? I was ready to grow into something so large she'd have no choice but to watch. The city felt different after the podcast dropped. Not brighter, exactly, but sharper, like the edges of everything had been sanded down just enough for me to grip them. For once, I didn't have to look over my shoulder when I walked into the diner. I didn't have to wonder what whispers trailed me down the street. They were all in the open now. People stopped me in line at the grocery store. At first, it made my skin crawl. The way strangers said my name like they owned a piece of my story. But then a woman I'd never seen before slipped her hand into mine by the produce aisle. "You reminded me I'm not too small to stand up," she whispered. Her fingers were cold, her eyes watery. I squeezed back, harder than I meant to. At the diner, Miri printed out the photo of me standing in the chapel, silk gown aglow under stained glass, and taped it behind the register like a trophy. "If they didn't know who you were before," she teased, "they sure as hell do now." Luis made a sign under it in Sharpie. "Be nice to your waitress. She might ruin your wedding." I rolled my eyes but left it there. Of course, Cassidy wouldn't let my story be the final word. The honeymoon photos became a flood. Her on the beach. Her with Brent pretending they were happier than ever. Her captions dripped with passive aggression so thick it was practically visible. "Family should lift you up, not tear you down. Sometimes people show their true colors when they're jealous. Smearwo. Focus on love, not drama." Each post made my skin itch. Not because they were about me, but because I could see the cracks. Her smile too wide, her eyes pinned to the lens like she was willing it to erase me. Brent's expression behind her, stiff, unreadable. I didn't comment, I didn't like or share, I didn't feed the fire she wanted. Instead, I poured all that restless energy into what Miri had called something bigger. At night, after the diner's last fry basket was scrubbed clean, I'd sit with my laptop in my lap and the city's hum drifting through my window. I started writing more than posts. I drafted short essays, real stories. Not just about Cassidy, but about the other times people like her had tried to cut me down to size. The landlord who tried to evict me for complaining about mold. The teacher who told me I was too mouthy to succeed. The manager who pocketed my tips when he thought I wouldn't notice. Each piece was a tooth pulled from an old wound. Painful, but honest. I gave them titles that bit back. "Too poor for your party," "The cost of being the quiet one," "The cost of silk as a weapon." I didn't expect them to spread, but they did. One morning, a woman from a small online magazine called. She'd seen the posts, heard the podcast, read the essays. "I want to run one," she said. "People need to hear you." A week later, my story sat on the front page. The headline punched me in the gut when I saw it. "Too poor for her sister's wedding. Too brave to stay quiet." It was cheesy, dramatic, and exactly what I needed. Dash dash dash. Of course, the attention came with claws. Old classmates messaged me out of nowhere, some supportive, some trying to mine my pain for gossip. Cassidy's circle doubled down. I got a letter from her lawyer, printed on expensive cardstock, hinting at defamation if I, quote, continued to spread malicious lies. It was laughable. I sent it to Miri. She cackled so hard she nearly dropped her phone. She's flailing. If she had anything real, she'd have hit you with a real suit by now. Still, the threats rattled me. Some nights I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake by going public. What if they did come for me? What if I lost my job because Rudy got tired of the circus? But every morning, the diner door chimed open and someone who'd never looked at me twice before would lean in and whisper, "Thank you." And the fear melted. A little, not gone, but smaller than the fire inside me. One Sunday, I found a letter shoved under my apartment door. No envelope, just a single page, Cassidy's sharp script bleeding across it. Kala, Noah, you've made your point. You're embarrassing yourself. You've embarrassed this family enough. If you keep this up, I will cut you off for good. I laughed so hard I startled my upstairs neighbor's dog. Cut me off. Like I hadn't been surviving on scraps and my own stubbornness since I was 16. I didn't respond. But I pinned the letter to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. The same one my mother gave me when I moved into my studio, a half-hearted gift that always felt like an afterthought. It looked good there, next to my rent notice and my stack of receipts for the silk gown's dry cleaning, proof that I'd built my own fortress out of the scraps they tried to bury me under. Some nights, I still second-guessed myself, but Miri kept me honest. She'd show up with cheap wine and cheaper pizza, our laptops open side by side on my floor. "So what's the next piece?" she'd ask, mouthful of crust. "I don't know," I'd say. "Something about how shame loses its teeth when you call it out." She'd nod. "Good. Make 'em choke on it." We brainstormed a name for my blog. Something that felt like me, not the pity project they expected. After a few terrible ideas, gilded gown, silk and sibling spite, we landed on something simple. Too poor to shut up. It fit. The blog went up on a Thursday. I barely hit publish before I wanted to claw the post back. But it was too late. Within hours, people were sharing it, commenting, sending me stories of their own. I stayed up until dawn reading them all. Single moms iced out of baby showers, black sheep cut from family wills, sisters who'd been told they were too plain to stand beside the pretty one. Their pain poured through my cracked phone screen like a tide I couldn't stop and didn't want to. For once, I wasn't alone, neither were they. By sunrise, my eyes ached and my chest felt raw, but underneath the exhaustion was something warm, purpose. Cassidy could post all the sunset selfies she wanted. She could spin her perfect narrative until the sun burned out, but she couldn't shut this down. And if she thought my silk gown was the sharpest blade I had, she hadn't seen anything yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The first week after launching the blog, my world tilted in ways I couldn't have predicted or controlled, even if I'd wanted to. It started small, a few dozen shares, then a few hundred. Strangers tagged my posts with their own stories, each one like a spark catching dry grass. By the time I stumbled into the diner the next Saturday, half the booths were buzzing with whispers that died the second I came near. "Kala," Rudy called from the kitchen window, waving a folded newspaper. "You seen this?" He held it up, and there it was. My face, mid-laugh on the podcast thumbnail, plastered next to a headline in the local arts and culture section. "Too poor to shut up, the voice that won't stay quiet." Miri grabbed it from him before I could. "They called you a voice, not a problem, not a scandal, a voice." I snatched it back, heart hammering. "It's just a puff piece." "Doesn't matter," she said, tapping the photo. "This makes you real to people who never looked twice before." That day, the diner got busier than I'd seen it in months. Not just for the pancakes or Miri's sass, but for me. People lingered at the counter, peeking over their menus to see if the girl who called her sister out in silk was really as unbreakable as they wanted her to be. One woman slipped me a note with her tip, "You made me brave enough to tell my husband I'm done hiding." It wasn't just flattery. It was a baton she was passing to me, her truth for mine. And I realized I couldn't fumble it. Luake. Of course, the tidal wave brought its share of wreckage. Cassidy escalated, just like Mary predicted she would. She started dropping little poisoned breadcrumbs on her socials. A photo of the two of us when we were kids, matching dresses and forced smiles, captioned asterisk. Some sisters just drift apart. It's sad when money makes people bitter. She shared staged shots of my mother at her house, framed in warmth so artificial it made my teeth ache. Asterisk's family is everything. If only everyone remembered that. I knew what she was doing. She was painting me as ungrateful, the disloyal black sheep who bit the hand that fed her. She'd always been good at twisting the knife while smiling for the camera. But this time I didn't flinch. I wrote another piece. Family is everything, unless you're the one they step on. Asterisk. I didn't name her, but I didn't have to. People connected the dots. They always do. The comment section exploded. Some told me to move on, to forgive, to stop airing my quote, 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 quote. But more than that, people shared their own dirty laundry. Threads ran hundreds deep. Confessions, grief, ugly honesty that sparkled brighter than any fake family portrait. Every word added a new layer of armor around my ribs. It wasn't long before a bigger media site reached out. An editor named Reese called me one night while I was scraping plates at the diner. "Your piece landed in my lap 3 times in one day. I think there's a column here. Regular. Your words. Your audience." My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped a tray. "A column? Like real money?" Reese laughed. "Not retire on a yacht money, but enough to remind you that your voice has value." When I hung up, Mary was waiting by the staff locker, arms crossed. "So?" "They want me to write. For real. Regularly," she shrieked, loud enough for Luis to peek out from the kitchen. Girl, you know what this means? That I'm about to get dragged even harder by Cassidy's minions?" Mary jabbed a finger at my chest. "No, it means you're about to get paid to do the one thing they always hated. Speak up." I sank onto the bench, my knees still jelly. They're never going to forgive me. "Good," she said, grinning. "Forgiveness is overrated." I signed the contract 2 days later. It was nothing glamorous. Just a steady gig to write 4 pieces a month, each one as raw and unfiltered as I could stand. But to me, it felt like more than money. It felt like a spine. The first piece was simple. What a silk gown taught me about power. I wrote it at the same rickety kitchen table where I'd once clipped coupons for day-old bread. The gown hung on my door, watching me like a ghost or a witness. When I hit send, my pulse thundered in my ears. But when the piece went live, it didn't just get clicks. It sparked conversations. Readers shared it with lines highlighted, quoting me back to myself. One comment pinned to the top said, "I read this out loud to my daughter so she knows she never has to shrink to fit in their box." I cried so hard I nearly missed my shift. One evening, after the dinner rush, Rudy cornered me behind the register. "You still planning to sling eggs and hash for minimum wage now that you're a big shot?" I blinked. "You firing me?" He snorted. "Hell no. You bring in half our lunch crowd just by breathing. But you're bigger than this place, Calla. Don't let us hold you back." Miri, wiping down the pie case, barked out a laugh. "She ain't leaving till we get her autograph framed above the counter." Luis yelled from the kitchen, "I already printed the photo!" I flipped them all off, but my chest felt warm. No one had ever told me I was too big for anything before. Cassidy tried one last swing, like a cornered snake snapping before it lost its fangs. She sent me a voice note, Not a call, not a message, but her voice hissing in my ear at 2 a.m. like we were kids again, whispering secrets we were too scared to say out loud. Kala, this ends now. Take it all down. Apologize. Tell them you lied. If you don't, I swear I'll make sure no one hires you again. You think you're untouchable? You're not. You're still the same sad little girl with holes in her shoes. I played it twice, saved it, uploaded it to my blog with a single line. When they can't kill your truth, they'll try to kill your courage. It went viral overnight. Not because it was shocking, but because it was so normal. So many people messaged, "My sister did this too. My mom said the same thing. My ex used to threaten me like this." Cassidy didn't know she was the villain in thousands of people's stories now, not just mine. And that was her real nightmare, losing control of the script. Miri and I celebrated with cheap whiskey on the stoop of my apartment building. We passed the bottle back and forth like teenagers, the city lights dancing on the silk gown draped around my shoulders like a cape. "You realize," she slurred, bumping her shoulder into mine, "you're not the poor sister anymore." "I'm still poor," I said, "but at least now I'm loud about it." She barked a laugh. "Too poor to shut up, baby." I let the whiskey burn my throat, let the city hum under my feet. Let my sister's voice fade into static I'd never let control me again. Tomorrow I'd write another piece. And another after that. And every word would be a silk thread tying my story together. Not for her, not for them, but for every poor girl who ever dreamed of showing up in a gown worth their oppressor's entire illusion. I closed my eyes and whispered to the night, "More to come. Watch me." I wish I could say that after that last threat from Cassidy, everything got easier. That once the voice note went viral and people rallied around me, my story became a fairy tale of overnight success and perfect endings. But that's not how life works, at least not for people like me who've been taught to eat disappointment with their morning coffee. The column gig was steady, but steady doesn't pay rent in a city that treats square footage like gold. I still worked my diner shifts, poured endless cups of burnt coffee for truckers and office drones, scraped gum off the bottom of booths that hadn't been new since my mother first told me I'd never make anything of myself. But something had shifted, a quiet hush in the way people looked at me when they came in. I wasn't just the tired girl behind the counter anymore. I was the girl in the silk gown, the girl who wouldn't shut up. It's funny how being seen can both set you free and trap you. Miri said it best one night when we were counting tips in the greasy back office. "You've got a crown now, babe. But they're gonna watch you wear it. And some of them want to see you drop it." She wasn't wrong. Cassidy went quiet for a bit. I knew she was licking her wounds, figuring out her next move. She'd always been the type to cut you off at the knees, with a smile on her lips. But now she knew I wouldn't sit there and bleed quietly. In her silence, other noise crept in. I started getting DMs from small-time shows, indie journalists, podcast hosts, hungry for the next viral story. Some were genuine, the kinds of people who asked good questions and listened when I answered. Others just wanted a soundbite they could twist into clicks. One local talk show host tried to bait me into calling Cassidy a monster on live radio. I laughed so hard I snorted. "She's not a monster, she's worse. She's a mirror." "What do you mean?" the host asked, leaning forward like he'd caught the scent of blood. I sipped my water and let the silence drag out. "A mirror shows you what you want to see, until it doesn't." He didn't know what to do with that, so we moved on, but when the clip went up, it hit a nerve. People reposted it, captioned it, made it into memes. She's a mirror. Some people got it, some twisted it into knots. But either way, they were listening. One morning, a girl knocked on the diner's back door. I'd just finished hauling boxes of pancake mix-up from the basement when I saw her standing there, clutching a battered notebook to her chest. She couldn't have been more than 19, with wild curls and eyes too big for her tired face. "You're Kala, right?" she asked, voice trembling. "From too poor to shut up?" I wiped my hands on my apron. "Yeah, you okay?" She looked down at her notebook. "I don't know where else to go. I read your blog. You said, sometimes it helps to tell someone." I didn't know what to say. No one trains you for this, being the landing pad for strangers' pain. So I did what Miri always did for me. I pulled her inside, sat her at the break room table, and let her talk. She told me about a father who called her worthless, a boyfriend who repeated it until it stuck. About dropping out of college because she couldn't stand feeling stupid anymore. About how she found my words at 3 in the morning and thought, if she can say it, maybe I can too. I poured her coffee and let her cry. When she left, she hugged me so tight I felt her ribs through her hoodie. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not shutting up." When she was gone, I sat there staring at the dented break room fridge for a long time. My throat felt scraped raw, like I'd swallowed a handful of gravel. It would be so easy to shut it all down, to crawl back into the quiet. But that wasn't an option anymore. Miri found me there, shoulders hunched. "You okay?" "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. She flopped into the chair across from me. "No one does, babe. But you're doing it anyway, that's the magic." The magic had its costs. A guy I'd been seeing casually, an accountant with soft eyes and a laugh that made me feel less alone, ghosted me after the third piece in my new column dropped. I found out later Cassidy had messaged him, sent him links, half-truths, old photos of me in my worst moments. His last text was short. "I can't handle the drama. You're amazing, but it's too much." I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it. Maybe I should have felt heartbroken, but all I felt was tired. Tired of loving people who flinched when the world saw the parts of me they'd rather pretend didn't exist. So I wrote about it. Too much for the wrong people, just enough for me. It was the most read post I'd ever written. One night, when the air turned crisp and the leaves started burning red at the edges, I pulled the silk gown from my closet. It still smelled faintly of the chapel. Lilies and fear and my sister's venom. I held it up to the light and wondered if I'd ever wear it again. "You should auction it," Mary said when she caught me staring at it. "Make your haters buy a piece of your story." I laughed. "They'd burn it on camera." "Then let 'em, fire's still light." But I couldn't part with it, not yet. The gown was more than fabric. It was the receipt for every time someone told me I'd never belong. Every stitch was a reminder that I showed up anyway. So I kept it, hung it in my window one night like a flag. The neighbors probably thought I was losing it. The crazy poor girl flaunting silk like it was a suit of armor. Maybe it was. By winter, the blog had grown bigger than I could handle alone. I had subscribers, actual people paying me a few bucks a month just to read my words. I hired Miri to help with the messages. She handled the trolls like a bouncer at a rowdy bar, swinging her sass like a bat. I got an email one night from a girl in Denmark. I showed up to my cousin's wedding in a red dress after they told me not to come. "I kept thinking of you. They didn't speak to me all night, but they saw me." She attached a photo, her, middle finger up, grinning like she'd just kicked down the gates of a castle. I printed it, pinned it next to Cassidy's old letter on my fridge. Proof that the world was bigger than her reach, bigger than any room she could lock me out of. On the first snow of the season, I stood on the diner's roof with Miri, passing a flask back and forth. The city glittered under a blanket of white. The silk gown, safe inside, felt like a heartbeat behind my ribs. "Do you ever regret it?" Miri asked, her voice soft under the stars. "Regret what?" "Opening your mouth, making it messy, not just letting her win." I thought about it. The lost sleep, the loneliness, the family ties that frayed until they snapped. The nights when I wondered if the world would ever see me as anything other than the, quote, poor sister who crashed a wedding. I looked at Miri, at the city spread out like a promise below us. "Not once," I said. "I'd rather be too poor to shut up than too scared to live." She bumped her shoulder into mine. "That's my girl." Below us, the world turned, cold and cruel and beautiful, and in my chest, the fire burned steady, waiting for the next story, the next truth, the next girl who needed to see someone stand up in silk and say, "I'm not leaving quietly." Tomorrow, I'd write again. Tomorrow, I'd remind them all, my sister, my city, the ghosts in my own blood, that they should have known better than to think I'd stay silent forever. Snow didn't stick long in our city. By the time January rolled around, The drifts that had glittered like spilled sugar melted into dirty slush lining the curbs. But the cold lingered, sharp, relentless, reminding me that some things don't thaw just because you wish they would. That winter, my world felt like a seesaw. One minute I was coasting on the thrill of a new subscriber milestone, 5,000 people reading my words every week, some paying more than they probably should. And the next, I was pulling double shifts at the diner because the column check came late and rent didn't care about my viral posts. Miri caught me staring at my cracked phone one night, eyes glazed from the glow of yet another interview request. "Hey," she said, snapping her fingers in my face. "Earth to Kala, come back." I blinked. "Sorry, I was just—" "Thinking about her again?" she asked, even though we both knew who her was. "She hasn't said anything in weeks," I admitted. "It's weird. She never stays quiet this long." Miri snorted. "Maybe she finally figured out she can't scare you back into your box." I wanted to believe that. But every time I let myself breathe, a dark part of me whispered, "Cassidy doesn't go quiet. She reloads." I found out what she was reloading one Tuesday morning, standing in the bakery line down the street. My phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Nice. Try playing the victim. Maybe tell the truth about what you did to your family." No name. No context. Just that. I didn't need a signature to know it had Cassidy's fingerprints all over it. By the time I got to the front of the line, there were 3 more messages. Screenshots of old photos, half-truths twisted into captions that made me look unhinged. A snippet of my father's funeral. Me standing off to the side while Cassidy gave a eulogy that made the congregation sob. The implication: she's always been the villain. I walked back to the diner in a fog, pastry bag limp in my fist. Miri saw my face and grabbed me before I could slip into the break room. "What happened?" I held out my phone. "She's feeding people poison again." Miri scrolled, her eyebrows climbing. "She's really trying to rewrite your whole life, huh?" "It's working," I whispered. "Look at the comments. They're eating it up. They think I'm just some bitter nobody who hates her because she's successful." Miri dropped my phone on the counter. "Then tell them the part she didn't." I blinked. "What?" "Kala," she said, leaning in close enough for me to smell the cinnamon gum she always chewed on shift. "You didn't come this far to let her control the last word. If she wants to drag your skeletons out, fine, but you tell it your way, all of it." "I can't air everything." "Why not?" she demanded. "Because it's ugly? So what? Ugly is honest." I didn't answer, but that night I sat at my kitchen table, the silk gown draped over my shoulders like a question. I stared at my blinking cursor until dawn. Then I started typing. "The truth you didn't ask for." That was the title. I poured everything into it. The screaming matches behind closed doors. The way Cassidy used to flip our mother's sympathy like a coin she never dropped. The trust fund our father left for both of us. How it quietly vanished into Cassidy's new house while I scraped together rent money in a studio that flooded every spring. I wrote about the day our father died, how I'd been the one to stay in the hospital for 3 days straight, how Cassidy swept in for the eulogy and left before the dirt even settled on the grave. I didn't make myself the hero, I made myself human, flawed, furious, tired, honest. I hit publish before I could change my mind. The blowback was instant, my email clogged with messages. Some supportive, some furious. The blog's subscriber count dipped, then spiked, then dipped again. Miri sat next to me, sorting the worst of it. "You knew this would happen," she said. "They want you to stay simple, one headline, one story." "Too bad," I said, wiping my eyes. "I'm not simple." She grinned. "There's my girl." Cassidy posted her own piece. A video this time, glossy and bright, filmed in her spotless living room. She cried on camera. She talked about how family is complicated, how some people choose drama over healing. She even dragged our mother in, sitting beside her like a prop. "I just want Kala to get help," she sniffled, dabbing at a dry eye. "I've always wanted what's best for her." Miri watched it with me. When it ended, she threw popcorn at the screen. "I want her to get help. Girl, please." I didn't respond. Not with another post. Not with a counter video. I just let it sit. Sometimes silence is louder than the loudest lie. And the world, my world anyway, noticed. People dissected every frame of Cassidy's tears. They remembered the voice note. They remembered her posts from the wedding. They started asking questions she couldn't spin away. And I kept writing. Winter bled into the hint of spring. The city thawed in patches. Slushy sidewalks turning into streams, the smell of stale snow giving way to the first sting of green. The diner stayed steady. So did the column. So did the blog. One afternoon, Miri and I took a walk to clear our heads. We ended up in a tiny park behind the library, the silk gown bundled into my bag like a talisman. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, kicking at a patch of ice. "Just starting over somewhere new?" "Every day," I admitted. "But if I go, she wins. She can say she chased me out of town." Miri looped her arm through mine. "You're not running, you're expanding. There's a difference." I laughed. "Expanding? You make it sound like I'm building an empire." "Aren't you?" she shot back. "Look at you, Kala. You turned one silk gown and a middle finger into a community, into a job, into a fire she can't put out." I leaned my head on her shoulder. "You always make it sound simple." "It is simple," she said, and for once I believed her. That night, back at my apartment, I stood at the window with the silk gown draped around my shoulders like a queen's cloak. I could see the city lights blinking back at me, a grid of tiny hopes and tiny heartbreaks, all stitched together by people who refused to stay quiet. Cassidy would keep trying. I knew that. She'd twist my story until it choked her, and then she'd try again. But the difference now was that I didn't need her to tell it for me. It was mine. Tomorrow, I'd pour another cup of coffee. I'd pull another truth from my chest, like a splinter. I'd write another piece. For the girl in Denmark, the girl behind the diner, the one inside me who once believed she wasn't worth the silk. I'd do it because silence never fed me. But my words? They'd keep me alive forever. Spring crept in like a promise no one dared believe. The city's gray crust melted into puddles that reflected tiny slices of sky, and the first flowers pushed up through cracks in sidewalks that had held my footsteps for years. It should have felt like a fresh start, but new beginnings have a way of carrying old ghosts in their pockets. By now, the blog was more than a blog. It was a beast with its own pulse. People sent me stories from every corner of the world. Cousins shut out of weddings, daughters banned from funerals, sisters torn to ribbons by family whispers. Each confession felt like a shard of glass I caught with my bare hands, and I'd sit at my kitchen table until dawn, trying to piece them into something worth reading. The money came, slow but steady. My column kept growing. A tiny online zine asked me to speak at their virtual event. I said yes before the fear could drown my voice. But every time I climbed another rung, the weight of Cassidy's silence pressed harder. She'd gone quiet again. No new posts, no crocodile tears on video. It should have comforted me, but it didn't, because if my sister was good at anything, it was biding her time until the moment she could strike the softest part of me. I was wiping down the counter at the diner when it came. A woman I didn't recognize sat at booth 4. Neat hair, crisp coat, nails painted in a shade only money could afford. She was too polished for the cracked vinyl seats and the stale coffee smell. But there she was, tapping her phone with one perfectly manicured finger. "Colorado?" she asked when I came over. Her voice was warm, sweet even, but her eyes were sharp. "I'm Olivia Brand. I work in PR. Your sister asked me to find you." I felt my stomach drop. "Cassidy sent you here?" She nodded, business smile glued in place. "She wants to meet, privately. No cameras, no social media. Just the two of you. She says you owe her that much." "Do I?" The bitterness slid off my tongue before I could catch it. Olivia shrugged like she didn't care either way. "Look, I'm just the messenger, but off the record, you're winning this. She knows it. That's why she wants to get ahead of it." I hated that word. Mums Yua winning. Like my life was a chessboard she could tip over when she got bored. "Tell her I'll think about it," I said, turning to clear a neighboring table. Olivia's hand darted out, grazing my wrist. Don't wait too long. She's spinning something big. Better you hear it from her first. I pulled away, pretending I didn't feel the panic crawling up my throat. Thanks for the tip. That night, Miri crashed on my couch, half-eaten takeout containers spread around us like a moat. She popped a dumpling in her mouth and pointed her chopsticks at me. You gonna meet her? I don't know, I muttered. Feels like walking into a snake pit wearing a meat suit. Miri snorted. If anyone can make a meat suit look good, it's you. This isn't funny, Mir. If she's planning something, then let her plan, she said, her tone sharper than usual. You can't keep dancing around her next move forever. She wants you scared. You know that, right? I stared at the silk gown draped over the back of my chair, my armor, my receipt, my reminder. What if she has something real this time? I asked. What if she really can wreck everything I've built? Mary leaned forward, poking my forehead with the tip of her chopstick. Everything you've built is yours, Calla. Not hers. Not even if she tears your name apart letter by letter. They can't unhear your truth. I tried to let that sink in, but doubt's voice is always louder at midnight. I agreed to meet Cassidy the next week. We picked a tiny cafe in the neighborhood where we'd grown up. Neutral ground, if such a thing existed for us. I wore the silk gown under my coat, a secret no one else needed to see. My armor. She was already there when I arrived. She looked tired. The dark smudges under her eyes reminded me of late nights when we were kids, whispering secrets under a blanket before we knew how to wield our words like blades. Calla, she said, standing to hug me. I stepped back. Don't. Just say what you came to say. She flinched. For a second, the mask slipped, and underneath it was the girl who once cried on my shoulder when Mom forgot her birthday. You're destroying me, she whispered. You know that, right? I laughed, the sound like glass cracking. No, Cassidy, you're destroying you. I'm just telling the truth. Her eyes shone with tears I didn't buy for a second. People look at me like I'm a monster now. They think I'm some rich witch who kicked her sister out for fun. You did. She shook her head. I just wanted boundaries, privacy. You turned it into this circus. I leaned in, voice soft but sharp enough to cut. You didn't want boundaries. You wanted a doormat. Her lips trembled. I'm begging you, take it down. The blog, the voice note, the column. I'll do anything. I'll pay you. I felt my heart squeeze. Not with pity, but with a strange grief for the sister I used to pretend she could be. You still think this is about money? I asked. You told me I was too poor for a dress. I bought a gown worth your mortgage just to stand in front of you and prove you can't buy my silence. She pressed her hands together like a prayer. What do you want, Calla? I stood. The cafe windows rattled with the passing subway. I want you to watch me keep talking. That's what I want. I left her there, staring into her latte like she could see her own reflection in the foam. Outside, the city smelled like thawing concrete and new beginnings. I slipped my coat open for a second, letting the silk catch the sun. When I got home, Mary was waiting on my stoop, 2 coffees in hand. Well? She begged, I said, collapsing next to her, offered me hush money. Mary snorted. You take it. I laughed so hard I spilled half my coffee on my coat. I told her to watch me instead. Mary raised her cup like a toast. To being too poor to shut up. I clinked mine against hers, to never being silent again. That night, I wrote until dawn. I wrote about sisters and silences, about gowns and guilt, about how power shifts when you claim it for yourself. I wrote about the girl I used to be, small, scared, always apologizing, and the woman I was becoming, louder than fear, sharper than shame. When I finished, I posted it without a single edit. She said she wants me quiet. I want her to hear every word instead. Tomorrow, I'd wake up tired. Tomorrow, I'd pour coffee for people who'd pretend they didn't read my story. Tomorrow, I'd count every tip like a prayer. Tomorrow, I'd write again. Because there are girls still waiting for their turn to speak. And they deserve to see what survival looks like in silk. The city bloomed overnight that spring. Crocuses pushing through sidewalk cracks, bus stop benches littered with petals, and the damp smell of rain lifting the grit off the streets I'd walked for years. It felt like the world was in on my secret, that I was no longer the poor sister who swallowed her tongue when family gossip carved her up behind closed doors. I'd spent months waiting for Cassidy's next move, bracing for the dagger hidden behind her apology, the poison laced in her pity. But when she begged me in that cafe, something shifted. Not in her, in me. For the first time, I realized she wasn't the monster I'd made her in my mind. She was just a sad girl trapped in a golden cage she'd forged herself, rattling the bars every time I refused to climb in there with her. And I wouldn't. Not ever again. I leaned into the fire. Every week, I wrote a new piece. Some were messy, about grief and betrayal, and how rage doesn't always keep you warm. Some were bright, about Miri's laughter in the diner at 2 a.m., about the way the silk gown looked in the sunrise when I draped it over my window to dry after the last dry cleaning run. Readers stayed. Some left, uncomfortable with my refusal to be either the perfect victim or the neat villain Cassidy painted me to be. But more came. More stories poured in. A woman who skipped her sister's wedding to take a solo trip to Italy. A man who wore a pink suit to his mother's funeral because he refused to be stuffed into grief's black uniform. A kid who called me from the other side of the world just to whisper thank you before they braved another day of being too much, too loud, too poor. I answered everyone. Or tried to. It was like holding back a flood with a paper cup, but I did it anyway. One night, I got invited to read an excerpt at a local storytelling event. Just a dusty back room of a community library with creaky folding chairs and a volunteer librarian who looked like she'd seen every family drama under the sun. Miri came with me, dragging Luis along for moral support. When they called my name, I stepped onto that tiny platform with the silk gown draped like a shawl over my battered jeans and dollar store tank top. It was the same silk that once made Cassidy's jaw drop. The same silk that bought me my freedom, and the same silk that would never fit in her wedding photos no matter how many times she tried to crop me out of her memory. I read the piece I'd written the morning after the cafe about refusing hush money, about how you can't spend silence like currency, about how poor girls survive on truth, because lies never fill your stomach for long. When I finished, the room was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat echo off the metal radiator by the exit sign. Then Miri started clapping. Loud, offbeat, her grin so wide it cracked the tension like a dropped glass. Others joined in. Not everyone, but enough. Afterward, a girl no older than 20 approached me, her eyes wet, hair tucked under a knit cap with threads unraveling at the seams. "I didn't know you could say these things out loud," she said. I squeezed her hand. "Neither did I, once." Cassidy didn't show up at my door again. She didn't send more notes. The PR woman never came back to the diner. Maybe she'd learned that some sisters don't fold just because you wag a check under their nose. Maybe she was back to curating her perfect brunches, her curated family-first captions with people who didn't see the cracks I'd pulled open for the world. I wondered sometimes if she still checked my blog. If she read my words late at night, a glass of expensive wine shaking in her hand, wishing she could pour her own truth out before it choked her to death. If she did, I hoped she found a sliver of freedom in my chaos, a chance she never took. But that was hers to claim, not mine to fix. The blog turned into more. Miri and I filed the paperwork for a tiny nonprofit, a digital refuge for black sheep who'd been cast out and told to shut up. We called it the Silk Rebellion. The name made Miri laugh so hard she spit coffee across my battered table. "Damn right it's silk," she said. "They expect rags. You give 'em luxury." I wanted it to be more than my story, a place for others to roar their own truths into a world that tells us to stay small. We didn't have fancy offices or a PR team. We had a PayPal link, a spreadsheet that made my eyes bleed, and a list of submissions so raw they left claw marks on my heart. It was messy, beautiful, real. I still poured coffee at the diner. Not because I needed to, though the extra cash didn't hurt, but because the booth near the window had become my second desk. Some days, old regulars slipped me their scribbled confessions on napkins instead of tips. Luis threatened to laminate them and stick them on the fridge. Rudy tried to kick me out when the local paper ran a piece about the Silk Rebellion. You're making this place look too classy, he grumbled. Pretty soon we'll have influencers posing in the damn bathrooms. But his eyes crinkled when he said it, and he slipped me an envelope with half his week's tips inside. For the cause, he said. Go buy yourself more silk. I didn't buy more silk. I didn't need to. The gown stayed draped over my window, catching the city's changing light, a flag for everyone who knew that sometimes the only thing you can do when the world tries to starve your story is wear it like armor. Cassidy once told me I was too poor for her wedding. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was too poor in politeness, in fake smiles, in the willingness to bend until I broke. But I was rich in something she'd never own, a truth too big to bury under monogrammed napkins and glossy family portraits. That truth lives in every girl who showed up in a gown worth more than the lies they were told to swallow. It lives in Miri's cackle at 3 a.m. when she catches me crying over the latest batch of submissions. It lives in the napkins taped to my fridge, next to Cassidy's letter, next to every receipt of a life they couldn't erase. It lives here. It lives now. It lives loud. Tomorrow, I'll pour coffee for people who pretend not to know my name. Tomorrow, I'll write until my knuckles ache. Tomorrow, I'll remind every sister, cousin, friend who's ever been told they're too poor, too loud, too much. That silk is nothing until you dare to wear it in defiance. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.